There are multiple probes underway into the crashes of two Boeing 737 MAX jets that went down just 5 months apart. Here in the U.S., the focus is on the approval process for the jets and also why their grounding was delayed. Frightening new details reveal minutes before Lion Air Flight 610 crashed in the Java Sea, the pilots frantically flipped through the pages of their quick reference handbook, looking for a way to keep the nose of the plane from going downward before they ran out of time. And now Bloomberg reports just 1 day prior, a crew on that same jet were faced with a similar malfunction with the anti-stall system. That's when an off-duty pilot riding in the jump seat sprang into action, taking control of the plane.
He took the appropriate action, turned off the electronic system, and controlled his tail manually and landed the aircraft.
This information comes as Ethiopian officials investigate last week's deadly plane crash, the second involving a 737 MAX 8 in 5 months. Preliminary reports point to Boeing's new anti-stall system, which has experts raising questions about how well pilots were trained to maneuver it.
We're doing a good job training U.S. pilots how to handle the new aircraft. And so I'm not sure if that same standard is being practiced around the world.
Boeing stands by the safety of its planes and has announced new software will be released soon. But European Union and Canadian officials say planes there will remain grounded until they conduct their own certification of the update.
We will not allow the aircraft to fly if we have not found acceptable answer to all our questions on both sides, whatever the FAA does.
Joining me now to discuss those investigations and a lot of other news out of D.C., ABC News political director Rick Klein. Rick, let's start with the newfound scrutiny for the FAA following those two 737 MAX crashes. There were questions about the approval process, questions about the responses after the crash, including Boeing CEO's contacts with the president, questions about Boeing's ties to D.C., even the FAA vacancy, which the administration tried to fill yesterday. We haven't really seen this kind of focus on a regulatory agency or regulations themselves since the 2008 crash. What's the sense in D.C.? How big a deal is this going to be?
I think the president makes it a big deal because of his personal involvement in relationships, his own feeling of being something of an expert on matters of aviation. He was more involved than as usual. It highlights, I think, the problem that many federal agencies have, which is a hollowing out, a number of vacancies at top positions, not just at FAA, but at other things around the Transportation Department and throughout the federal government. This is one consequence of having a federal government that is as lightly staffed as it is right now. The Trump administration really hasn't been nearly as aggressive as its predecessors in filling positions. They've allowed things to go on in acting or open capacities for a long time, and that's led to a lack of a firm sense of oversight and chains of command. And then I think you add into that the fact that Boeing is as well connected as it is throughout Washington, and it's another level of complication for all.
Given those connections between Boeing and D.C., do you expect Democrats to try to make hay out of this, or will they tread lightly? Boeing is a big contributor to both parties.
And I think you have to be careful to not look like you're making a political game out of a tragedy and around real safety concerns about a major company. And no one is calling out Boeing's entire fleet here. Obviously, the entire aviation industry, military complex, all depend on Boeing and its continued existence and strength, and those connections matter. So I think they'll wait to see politics play out. I do think, though, if there's more evidence of the president's personal involvement, playing any kind of favors or delays based on his private conversations, I think there'll be scrutiny on that.
To the economy, the White House Council of Economic Advisors has said that the Trump tax cuts will not produce the growth at the levels that they or the president had projected. He had been talking about 5 or 6% growth. Council of Economic Advisors said 3% over the long term. It's been above 4% for 1 quarter in Trump's presidency. It's been above 3% in just 2 quarters. Will there be another effort to try and goose the economy from this administration, or would that just be seen as admitting that the White House is admitting failure?
Yeah, they'll definitely try. I mean, there's been talk about bringing back another tax cut. It's not going to happen, though, with Democrats controlling Congress. I don't think you're going to be able to go back to that move. I think if the economy shows signs of weakening, you'll have more insistence from the president and others that more be done about it. But you frankly run out of options. This has blown huge holes in the deficit and the debt. We're talking about red ink. As far as you can see, the Republican Party's basically dropped that talking point from its longstanding list. The president doesn't talk about it. The Republican Party doesn't talk about it. So I think they're going to be hard-pressed to find other things to do around this. And I think for most people in the public, if the economy seems to be doing well, whether it's 3, 4, 5, 6%, doesn't really impact your life.
We've been hearing a lot over the last couple of days. President Trump continuing his one-sided feud with the late Senator John McCain.
President, why are you attacking Senator John McCain 7 months after his death?
I'm very unhappy that he didn't repeal and replace Obamacare. As you know, he campaigned on repealing and replacing Obamacare for years, and then he got to a vote and he said thumbs down. And frankly, had we even known that, I think we would have gotten a vote because we could have gotten somebody else. So I think that's disgraceful. Plus, there are other things. I was never a fan of John McCain, and I never will be.
Never a fan of John McCain, never will be. We're hearing some pushback from Republicans, a lot of unnamed senators and representatives. You'd think this would damage his relationship with the GOP lawmakers even more. Will it? And if it does, what would that look like? Or is the fear of Trump and primaries enough to keep Republicans in line?
I think it's mostly the latter. You are seeing some Republicans speak out to defend John McCain, but even some of his closest friends like Lindsey Graham aren't really doing it very, very loudly right now. He has fought with John McCain while he was alive, and since then pretty regularly. I feel like that's baked in the cake for a lot of Republican lawmakers. Frankly, they're flummoxed by it. They don't understand it. This seems to have been sparked by a stray comment by a commentator on a cable show over the weekend. You mentioned it as a one-sided fight. It has to be a one-sided fight, but one of the guys has been dead for 7 months. It is extraordinary. It is unusual. It is not productive for lawmaking in any way that I can understand, other than to explain it by saying the president likes to hit people that he perceives have hit him.
Now to what I've been calling the love triangle between George Conway, Kellyanne Conway, and Donald Trump.
Kellyanne Conway, one of President Trump's most trusted and visible aides, is now caught in the center of an increasingly public and bitter feud between her boss and her husband. The president on Tuesday branded George Conway a total loser after the longtime conservative lawyer repeatedly publicly questioned the president's mental fitness. Conway replied, tweeting, "Congratulations, you just guaranteed that millions of more people are going to learn about narcissistic personality disorder and malignant narcissism." George Conway's rise as one of the most vocal critics of the president is a striking contrast from his wife's frequent TV appearances defending Trump.
Thank you, President Trump.
Here's how Kellyanne Conway handled the situation this week.
Your husband has been tweeting his concerns about the president's mental fitness for office. Are those concerns that you share, or how do you deal with?
No, I don't share those concerns. And I have 4 kids, and I was getting out of the house this morning before I got here and talked to the president about substance. So I may not be up to speed on all of them.
On Tuesday, her husband told the Washington Post he needs to get it off his chest, using Twitter, quote, "so I don't end up screaming at her about it."
I don't think she likes it. But I've told her I don't like, the administration. So it's even, it's one of these things.
He also told the Washington Post, quote, "the mendacity, the incompetence, it's just maddening to watch."
There's been a lot of interest in this on a sort of soap opera level, the dynamics of the Conways' relationships. Other people wondering if George Conway is the release valve for Kellyanne. I'm curious, what about this interests you? If you could get one question asked and answered, what would it be?
I would love to know what the Conways are saying about this to each other, because you take away the artifice of the public fights and the tweets and the rest. Is George Conway saying this directly to Kellyanne? Does Kellyanne know that he's going to be tweeting these things? Is she okay with it at some level? That, to me, is the most fascinating piece of this, because you're right, it's a love triangle with a lot of pointy angles all over it, because this heads in some strange directions without any precedent. Once again, a bizarre fight between the husband of one of the president's top advisors and the President of the United States himself.
The division between the Conways got me thinking, and bear with me for a tangential point here. My beloved Washington Capitals, who won the Stanley Cup, are set to visit the White House on Monday. Very united fan base, but now that fan base is divided about people reacting about those who go to the White House, those who don't. We know, we've talked before about how Trump is politically divisive at the Thanksgiving dinner table. A lot of people might think that political pros in D.C. don't see that as that big a deal. Every president's been a little bit divisive. But just how divisive is he in D.C., and especially compared to past presidents? Is this just something wholly different from anything we've seen before?
It is. It's a different level. Families are divided, of course. I think Washington itself is divided in large measure over what the presidency means. And I think when you see fan bases divide like this, it's for good reason. It's because sports really reflects society in moments like this. And there's a portion of the Washington Capitals fan base that is loyal to the president, likes the president, thinks a visit to the White House is good. And there's a big chunk of Caps fans and fans of any team that think that he's a bad guy and that they shouldn't justify a trip to the White House. And his forays into athletics athletics, I think, only underline those points. So it'll be interesting to see who shows up here on Monday. It's been delayed for some time. Obviously, it's a lot easier for the Caps than most teams to get over to the White House, but it is happening here toward the end of the regular season.
Well, if nothing else, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to express my fandom once again and come up with a political point to make it happen. Rick Klein, political director for ABC News. As always, Rick, thanks.
Thank you.
In other news, the Trump administration's move to ban most transgender people from serving in the military has just hit a hurdle in the courts. Up next, a transgender soldier joins us to tell her story and express her concerns and frustrations.